Hey everybody, welcome to Assignment 6, Unit 1, First People, First Farmers. Tonight you're going to be looking at page 32 through 35 and completing questions 26 through 37, and if that looks like a lot, he thinks so too. Some items I'd like you to look for in definitions and highlight is teff, which is an African grain which makes flour on page 32, and here's how some people store their grain. The longest fall ever. Next is predecessor, something replaced by another on page 33. And here we have a baby who might be replacing grandpa after he fell. Don't worry, it's not actually grandpa, it's a zombie, so he's probably okay also. Everybody's fine here, everybody's fine. Diffusion, spreading out widely, refers to this ink spreading out, and it'll go so slowly that we'll just wait for it to completely restart, which should be about right now. And there's where it started. And finally, displacement, which is moving something from its origin on page 34. And he is being moved from his origin. Lucky for him, he's got shades on to keep the sun out of his eyes. That's a great morning. Okay, so I'll check you back here on page 32, second paragraph, for some question support. Archaeological evidence suggests that the transition to a fully agricultural way of life in parts of this region took place quite quickly, within as few as 500 years. Signs of that transformation included large increases in the size of settlements, which now housed as many as several thousand people. In these agricultural settings, archaeologists have found major innovations: the use of sun-dried mud bricks, the appearance of monuments or shrine-like buildings, displays of cattle skulls, more elaborate human burials, including the removal of the skull, and more sophisticated tools such as sickles, polished axes, and awls. Okay, question support. 26, you don't have to do. 27, you don't have to do. Continuing on, page 32. At roughly the same time, perhaps a bit later, another process of domestication was unfolding on the African continent in the eastern part of what is now the Sahara in present-day Sudan. Between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, however, scholars tell us that there was no desert in this region, which received more rainfall than currently and had extensive grassland vegetation, and was relatively hospitable to human life. It seems like that cattle were domesticated in this region about 1,000 years before they were separately brought under human control in the Middle East and India. At about the same time, the donkey was also domesticated in northeastern Africa near the Red Sea and spread into the southwest Asia, even as the practice of raising sheep and goats moved in other direction. In terms of farming, the African pattern again was somewhat different. Unlike the Fertile Crescent, where a number of plants were domesticated in a small area, sub-Saharan Africa witnessed the emergence of several widely scattered farming practices. Sorghum, which grows well in arid conditions, was the first grain to be tamed in the eastern Sahara region. In the highlands of Ethiopia, teff, and highlight that word teff, a tiny, highly nutritious grain, as well as onset, a relative of the banana, came under cultivation. In the forested region of West Africa, yams, oil palm trees, okra, and the kola nut, used as a flavoring for cola drinks, emerged as important crops. The scattered location of these domestications generated a less productive agriculture than in more favored and compact Fertile Crescent, but a number of the African domesticates, sorghum, castor beans, gourds, millet, and the donkey, subsequently spread to enrich the agricultural practices of Eurasian peoples. Question 28. What preceded the domestication of plants in Africa, and how did Africa differ from the regions that experienced an agricultural revolution? Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's right. There used to be no desert there. It was lots of rainfall. So that preceded them. And how did they differ? Well, it's because they had, in arid conditions, grains that could be used there that other places did not have. Question 29. Describe teff. Stop and think. and respond. Yeah, exactly. It's what you would call a tiny nutritious grain, but it's located in Ethiopia. Continuing on, bottom of page 32. Yet another pattern of agricultural development took shape in the Americas. Like the agricultural revolution in Africa, the domestication of plants in the Americas occurred separately in a number of locations. In the coastal Andean regions of western South America, in Mesoamerica, in the Mississippi River Valley, and perhaps the Amazon Basin. But surely its most distinctive feature lay in the absence of animals that could be domesticated. Of the 14 major species of large animals that have been brought under human control, only one, the llama or alpaca, existed in the Western Hemisphere. Without goats, sheep, pigs, cattle, or horses, the peoples of the Americas lacked sources of protein, manure for fertilizer, and power to draw plows or pull carts, for example, that they were widely available to societies in the Afro-Eurasian world. Because they could not depend on domesticated animals for meat, agricultural peoples in the Americas relied more on hunting and fishing than did peoples in the Eastern Hemisphere. Okay, question 30. What was the most distinctive feature of the agricultural revolution in the Americas? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, exactly right. They didn't have animals. They didn't have large animals like the Eastern Hemisphere did. Question 31. How many of the 14 major species of large mammals that have been brought under human control existed in the Western Hemisphere? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, right. Just one, the alpaca or the llama. And question 32. How did the lack of domesticated animals impact the peoples of the Americas? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, right. They had to depend more on animals to hunt and fish than the people in the Eastern Hemisphere. So if they were domesticating animals, it was important to focus on hunting and fishing. Yeah, right. They had to spend more time hunting and fishing because of the absence of those large animals. Continuing on. Furthermore, the Americas lacked the rich cereal grains that were widely available in Afro-Eurasia. Instead, they had maize or corn, first domesticated in southern Mexico by 4000 to 3000 BCE. Unlike the cereal grains of the Fertile Crescent, which closely resemble their wild predecessors, and highlight that word, predecessors, the ancestor of corn, a mountain grass called teosinte, looks nothing like what we know as corn or maize today. Thousands of years of selective adaptation were required to develop a sufficiently large cob and a number of kernels to sustain a productive agriculture, an achievement that one geneticist has called arguably man's first, and perhaps his greatest, feat of genetic engineering. Even then, corn was nutritionally poorer than the protein-rich cereals for the Fertile Crescent. To provide sufficient dietary protein, corn had to be supplemented with squash and beans, which were also domesticated in the Americas. Thus, while Middle Eastern societies quite rapidly replaced their gathering and hunting economy with agriculture, that process took 3,500 years in Mesoamerica. Another difference... Question 33. Why was the domestication of corn in the Americas, according to one geneticist, arguably man's first and perhaps his greatest feat of genetic engineering? That was geneticist. Stop and think and respond. Yeah, that's right, because it took thousands of years to develop the large cob with all the kernels on it that we have today. Question 34. Compare corn to cereal grains of the Fertile Crescent. Stop and think and respond. Yeah, right. If you remember the map we looked at, the teosinte had to be supplemented with squash and beans in Mesoamerica, where the Fertile Crescent had access to sufficient dietary proteins and their grains. Continuing on the last paragraph on page 34. Another difference in the unfolding of the agricultural revolution lay in the north-south orientation of the Americas, which required agricultural practices to move through and adapt to quite distinct climatic and vegetation zones if they were to spread. The east-west axis of North Africa or Eurasia meant that agricultural innovation could spread more rapidly because they were entering through similar environments. Thus, corn, beans, squash, which were first domesticated in Mesoamerica, took several thousand years to travel the few hundred miles from their Mexican homeland to the southwestern United States, and another 1,000 years or more to arrive to eastern North America. The llama, guinea pig, potato, which were domesticated in the Andean highlands, never reached Mesoamerica. Question 35. How did the north-south orientation of the Americas affect the spread of agriculture in the Americas? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, right. They had to adapt to different climates if they were to spread north. Question 36. How did the east-west axis of Eurasia affect the spread of agriculture in Eurasia? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's because whenever they were moving east and west, they were entering similar environments, so they didn't have to adapt as they did in the Americas. Question 37. Identify 3 candidates for domestication in the Andean highlands that never reached Mesoamerica. Stop and think and respond. Yeah, exactly. Those candidates are corn, beans, and squash that never reached. Continuing on, the globalization of agriculture. From the various places where it originated, agriculture spread gradually to much of the rest of the earth, although for a long time it coexisted with gathering and hunting ways of life. Broadly speaking, this extension of farming occurred in 2 ways. The first, known as diffusion, and highlight that word, diffusion, refers to the gradual spread of agricultural techniques and perhaps of the plants and animals themselves, but without the extensive movement of agricultural people. Neighboring groups exchanged ideas and products in a down-the-line pattern of communication. A second process involved the slow colonization or migration of agricultural peoples as growing populations pushed them outward. Often this meant the conquest, absorption, or displacement, and highlight that word displacement, of the earlier gatherers and hunters, along with the spread of the languages and cultures of the migrating farmers. In many places, both processes took place. And that's it. So good luck with your assignment tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.